you feel called out by the title of this episode, then you are in the right place and I have done my job, or at least half of it, because in this episode, I am going to get you from planning to moving forward on a thing or letting it go for good. So stick around because we're going to get into why you procrastinate, why it's a huge red flag, and what you can do about it. But before we get into it, welcome if you're new. My name is Karen McGill. I'm an ADHD coach and creator, and I'm here for the busy, ambitious brains who want to do all the things and plan all the things, but then not do anything about it until today. So let's get into it. So procrastinating probably needs no introduction for you, but I'm going to go ahead and define it anyway, so we're all kind of working from the same page here. Planning is when you procrastinate by planning to do something, but then never actually taking action on doing the things that you planned. It is very similar to procrastinating, which I covered in a different episode, and I will link it above. But essentially, this act of planning to do something feels like we're in it. We have a goal, we want to do something, so we plan and we plan and we plan. But essentially, it's just planning to do a thing, which not only gives us this feeling like we're actually doing the thing without ever going out of our comfort zone or breaking a sweat, but it also gives us a little hit of dopamine, because dopamine is what we get when we anticipate doing something. We anticipate the reward of actually completing something and getting whatever the outcome is, and it feels really good. So no wonder we enjoy this process of planning so much, because it feels like we're doing something constructive and we're writing something down and it looks like we're doing the thing and we can tell other people that we're doing the thing. But in fact, we're not actually doing anything to move that goal forward. We're not getting out of our comfort zone. We're not taking any risk or action. We don't even need to put pants on to plan. So as you might imagine, it's a very high reward, low risk activity. And that's why we love doing it so much. But the reality is that even though it seems very high reward, it's not. And it can actually be very damaging to your confidence and your sense of self in the long run. So stick around because I will break that down and it is very important. But first, let's address why we get stuck in planning and never actually follow through on anything. It could actually stem from a number of reasons, but these are the most common patterns I see in my clients. Typically, it's because number one, they lack the confidence to actually move forward with what it is they want to do. So they use over planning as a way to compensate for that lack of confidence, which is very similar to the next thing I see, which is just a general fear of failure. You can be so afraid to try something and fail that you can get stuck in the planning phase, coming up with every conceivable thing that might go wrong and how you might plan to accommodate for it. But that's an endless cycle, because the number of things that can go wrong with anything we try in life is infinite. So you'll never get out of that cycle of fear. And then the other very common pattern I see with planning is that we don't actually want to do the thing. We want to have done the thing. And I can give you a very specific example here. I have always been someone who has wanted to have run a marathon. And I use those words very specifically. I have spent countless hours finding just the right race and just the right training routine, and then taking that routine and putting it in my calendar. Sometimes I even register for the race itself. But you know what I never actually do? I never actually start training for the race, or at least I'll get 2 weeks in, and then I'll remember that I hate running long distances and my knees don't like it either. And I will completely abandon that idea and move on to the next thing until I forget that I did that and start all over with choosing a new race, rinse and repeat. Until one day when I had an honest conversation with myself, and rather than wasting all this time and energy planning something I knew in the back of my mind that I was never actually going to run, I said to myself, Karen, do you actually want to run a marathon, or do you want to have run a marathon? And that's when I realized this very specific and important distinction. And at that point, I realized it was time to give up this ridiculous and cyclical dream I had of being a marathon runner and put my time and energy into something else that I actually did want to move forward on. Now, before we go on, let me be clear. I am not poo-pooing the idea of planning. Planning is very important. And if you've been around here for a minute, then you know that it has been the number one thing that has changed the game for me in my very scattered and ADHD life. But let me ask you this. When you think back to all of the hard things that you have accomplished in your life, whether it's a running race or starting a job or finishing university, Was it the plan that got you there? Like, was it the pens that you had, or the paper you used, or the washi tape and the endless amount of stickers that got you to that goal? I don't think so. In fact, I think there was a few other very important elements that got you there, and planning probably wasn't one of them. And when I think back in my own life on the things that I've done that were really hard, the plan was a very small part of it. The plan was there, but I paid somebody else to give it to me because I'd never done those things before. So no amount of Googling or spreadsheets or ChatGPT would have helped me get to where I wanted to go unless I had all of the other more important elements, like a commitment to doing it because I had a strong why, a community, a coach, structure, a deadline, urgency, skin in the game. I invested in those endeavors to the point where there was no way I was going to pull out because the sunk cost was too great to me. Also, just sheer ego. When I did the half Ironman, it was team and training. So I had to raise like $5,000 to do this race. And as more and more people invested in me, the stakes became higher and higher. So there was no way that I could drop out. So tip number one, if you are stuck in the cycle of procrastinating because you're trying to figure out how to do something you've never done before, stop right there and go find someone else who has done what it is you want to do and has helped other people do what it is you want to do, and pay them to give you a plan because they're going to know all the pitfalls and areas that you should avoid and things that you're not even thinking about. So forget ChatGPT and frickin' Google and go find another human being who knows how to do what it is you want to do and ask them for a plan. And then spend the rest of your time finding all the other things that I just mentioned, like urgency, support, accountability, structure. Those things are far more important than you trying to make up a plan all on your own. So now that we got that out of the way, let's address the real elephant in the room here. The reason why I think the majority of us actually procrastinate. I think we do this because we want to do a thing, but deep down, there's a voice saying to us, you're never going to do this. It's never going to work. You're never going to follow through and you're going to fail. And while we all have that voice, the real reason why you're staying in procrastinating is because you believe that voice. You hear it and you believe it. Let me give you another example from my own life. Prior to the business I have today, I have had multiple startups that went absolutely nowhere. With every business that I started, I did it because I wanted to get out of corporate. I was running away from what I didn't want rather than running towards an idea that I thought was really good. So I would find a mediocre idea or something I saw other people doing. I would think, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. I can do that. And I would plan this elaborate business out in my head, in my journal, in my little daily planner, but I would never actually do anything with all of those plans. I would rarely get to the point where I put the shingle on the door and announce my business with an actual product or offer and actually start selling it and making money. In a few cases I did, but for the most part, my businesses never really got out of the idea stage. And that cycle that I found myself in over and over again actually started to erode my self-confidence. And that little voice I had in my head became louder and louder. And the louder it became, the more I believed it. And the more I believed it, the more I got stuck in this planning cycle. And while you might be thinking, well, that's pretty harmless. We all do that. We start things, we plan them, but we never follow through. When you continue to do that over and over again, the long-term effect starts to chip away at your confidence and your self-identity. And that little voice inside you builds more and more evidence every time you prove that what it's saying is true. So now you've got this narrative of I try things, I plan them, but I never follow through. And that's just who I am. And it starts to show up more and more in your behavior and the outcomes you have in life. So there is actually a real danger and cost to this. And if you're someone who has low self-esteem, if you're someone who starts things but never follows through, then I want you to really listen to what I say next, because we're going to dive into how to stop this cycle and actually follow through on the things that you really want to do. Number one, identify the area that you find yourself procrastinating in. Number two, identify the worst case scenario that would happen if you took action and this thing completely bombed or failed. What is the worst case scenario? And if that happened, what would you do about it? Now, obviously, the worst case extreme scenario is probably not going to happen. So take a step back and ask yourself, what is the most likely scenario to happen if I take action? And what would I do in that most likely scenario? Once you've got the most likely pitfall and what you would do, now ask yourself, is the juice really worth the squeeze? So, for example, let's take my marathon planning cycle that I was doing every single year. Finally, I got to a point where I asked myself, why am I not doing this? And when I thought about the worst case scenario, it was probably you'll get hit by a bus and die. But that's unlikely. The more likely thing that would happen is that I would sustain an injury from my training, and then I wouldn't be able to do any activity. And working out is very important for me and my mental health. So I had to ask myself, if that is the most likely thing that will happen, is the juice really worth the squeeze here? And the answer to that was unequivocally no, the juice is not worth the squeeze here. And at that point, I was able to let that cycle of planning and not following through go. And I have never even entertained the idea of doing a marathon since that time. Now, let's say you go through that exercise and you determine that the juice is worth the squeeze and you really do want this thing. How do you get yourself out of the cycle of procrastinating? If that is the case for you, I want you to go back to what I said earlier about all of the things that actually do move the dial when you want to move forward with something and start adopting them. That means finding somebody else who's done what you've done to give you a plan, finding accountability, structure, urgency, putting skin in the game, investing in what it is you want to do, whether you hire a coach or buy a program, because those are the elements that are going to create the environment for you to actually move forward with what it is you want to do and complete it. And here's the real magical part of all of this. If you previously determined that the juice is worth the squeeze and you really want to do this, but after everything that I've just mentioned, you really don't want to invest the time or the real money into creating an environment for yourself to succeed, then chances are at this time, the juice really isn't worth the squeeze. Now, you might be saying, but Karen, I really just don't have the time or have the money to invest, but I really want this thing. If you really wanted the thing, you would find the money and you would find the time. If you really want the thing, the juice will become worth the squeeze. And it might just mean that right now is not the time. Maybe you'll have more money and more time 6 months down the road or a year down the road or 2 weeks from now. But the most important thing is that you've realized that right now, in this moment, the juice actually isn't worth the squeeze. At that point, you can close the book, literally or figuratively, on whatever it is you're procrastinating on right now, and pour your time and energy and attention into what does matter most right now. And that is a very liberating thing. So I hope that you found value in this exercise to clarify what's really important and to get yourself out of procrastinating mode. And if you are someone who struggles with planning and execution, then definitely check out Distraction to Action, the program I developed specifically for folks who want to do all the things but struggle to follow through on any of them. I will link it here and link it below if you're interested. But on that note, guys, thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.